Paradise Pond is the centerpiece of Smith College. It spans 16 acres and resembles a horseshoe in shape, with a flower-strewn island in the middle. The pond creates an idyllic vista for students, groups of which can always be seen taking photos, hiking, picnicking, canoeing, and just hanging out nearby in the warm weather. Even in the winter months, Paradise Pond still accommodates snowshoeing, ice skating, and cross-country skiing. Year-round, science classes and the college's outdoor adventure program coordinate activities and studies around the area. Promotional brochures and tour videos are always sure to center the pond and give it adequate airtime.
Paradise Pond is one of Smith's most treasured spots.
As you can imagine, the aesthetic and recreational value of Paradise is crucial to Smith College, which is why the pond and its image are strictly maintained. With Paradise Pond dating back to before Smith's inception, it's easy to forget that it's actually man-made. Water from the Mill River collects in the pond, and the excess is released over a roaring spillway. While the pond certainly looks great, its existence is an environmental concern. Dammed up water becomes stagnant, and everything in the water, like toxins, pollutants, mercury, lead, petroleum hydrocarbons, bacteria, and sediment, builds up in the pond. To make sure all that sediment doesn't fill up the pond and turn it back into a moving channel, Smith excavates about 15,000 cubic yards of silt every few years. Overall, pond maintenance is estimated to cost the college $91,000 annually, before we factor in the repair costs for dam leakage. Historically, the pond has been drained and dredged using heavy machinery to scoop out silt by the truckload. It was dredged twice in 1974 after a sewage pipe broke, and once again in 1982. It wasn't until 1990 that Smith officials began hitting roadblocks. In January, they're passing through the proper channels, getting things approved by the planning board. This year, it's published that Smith plans to store 5,000 cubic yards of silt at the Lyman Estate just off Lyman Road for horticultural purposes. But in February, Lyman Road residents have a lot to say to the zoning board about the thousands of cubic yards of dirt destined to be dumped next to their homes. The street is too narrow for transport trucks, the equipment is too noisy, the silt smells awful and would worsen the neighborhood's mosquito problem. Plus, who knows the health and environmental impact of dumping a bunch of polluted silt in a residential area? In April, Smith backs out on the Lyman Road plan and things move forward. But in June, new state regulations dictate that Smith needs to leave 9,000 square feet of the pond undredged. If I'm doing my math right, 16 acres of pond is equivalent to 696,960 square feet of pond. 9,000 square feet would be about 1% of the pond. An environmental analyst explains that leaving some silt would mean leaving a bunch of vegetation intact, which helps water quality by absorbing pollutants. She makes a really strong argument, saying how this preserves multiple uses of the pond and is a net positive for the environment, with little hardship for the college. In the same article, Smith's representatives push back against the environmentalist take. The project manager complains that he doesn't even know what they're protecting. The director of the Smith College physical plant implies that leaving a small patch of plants would ruin one of the centerpieces of the campus. The college appeals the ruling and wins. Then, in August, we have this nice article about how a few thousand cubic yards of the silt was put to use as loam for Westhampton's new elementary school and handed out to 20 or 30 folks nearby to use as soil in their gardens. 8 years later, however, the Department of Environmental Protection says that Smith silt is actually polluted. Roadway runoff has caused hydrocarbon contamination in the pond, and since the DEP lowered the safety threshold of hydrocarbons from 200 to 100 parts per million, Smith sediment is unsafe for anything but topping off a landfill. Especially with what we know today about the pond containing lead and mercury too, the fact that this debris was given out for kids to play on and families to grow food in is a little concerning. In 2008, Smith experimented with hydraulic dredging, which doesn't require draining, touting how beneficial the method would be for wildlife. Their news release fails to mention how this method also conveniently prevents the regular eyesore of the pond reduced to a muddy pit. Obviously, we can't have the visiting alumni and prospective touring students see that. In the following years, Smith would switch direction entirely and begin an annual tradition of draining the pond and allowing those massive piles of sediment to wash downstream, rather than trucking them off to a landfill. This SoFIAN article by Oliver Claire Wong mentions how it would be far cheaper and environmentally friendly to just let the pond revert to a flowing river. However, there's also a perceived economic benefit to keeping the pond, since the college may fear that destroying the familiar landscape would cause a decrease in alumni donations. Additionally, the pond is so prevalent in promotional material that it could be considered an enrollment-boosting asset, vital to the appeal of the campus. Apart from the pond's dredging history, there's also the beaver dilemma. In 1995, a population of beavers made their way down the Mill River and came to reside in Paradise Pond. Usually, the problem with beavers is that they dam up moving water, but we've already done that to the pond. The problem with these beavers was that they gnawed down nearby trees, as beavers tend to do. Beavers just being beavers, building homes and finding food. But the articles posted about the incident don't see it that way. This was an invasion in which unwelcome, nuisance beavers destroyed long-standing, beautiful, graceful trees that appeared in tourist photographs and scenic postcards, threatening the delicate ecosystem and, unspoken, the heavily invested in aesthetics of the campus. The assistant director of the Botanic Gardens and a biology professor were both interviewed at the time and commented that the beaver activity was about finished for the season, as winter was already underway. They didn't expect the young beavers to even survive until the spring, so Smith could leave the problem to eliminate itself. But Smith didn't want to take that chance. The search for a trapper began immediately, and since state law requires trapped beavers to be killed rather than relocated, the beavers were put to death. It was a difficult decision and a catch-22, but in the end, the curated tree collection was just more valuable than these invading beavers. And yeah, you can probably catch the sticky rhetoric in there about the beavers being less worthy of life because they are newly arrived, in comparison to the trees that have been on that land for so much longer and are perceived to add more value to the campus. I also just had to pick out this quote from an interviewed biologist who says, "It's not the beavers people object to, it's what the beaver does." Does that sound familiar at all? On the surface, the pond is a beautiful paradise, as every piece of media released by the college and local newspapers will tell you. Below that, there's a lurking contamination that we never really hear about, and there's certainly an investment in keeping it that way.